Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, the CEEMAN and Emerald Publishing Case Writing webinar. My name is Sarah Anderson and I'm the Cases Marketing Manager at Emerald Publishing. In our session today, we'll be talking about what makes the best case study and how you can make yours stand out amongst the crowd. We'll also be sharing details with you on how you can be in with a chance of winning the Emerald and CEEMAN competition. I just want to start with a couple of housekeeping items before we get going. So the webinar is going to be recorded and will be sent to you by email, by the email you registered with following the session. And please feel free to share this with colleagues. The session should last around 1 hour. If you want to ask any questions as we're going along, please feel free to put those in the question panel on the right-hand side. And we'll have time to answer all questions at the end of the session. Now, very quickly, just before we begin, can I ask you, if you'd like to, just to pop in the chat box where you're joining us from today. It's nice to see where in the world everyone is. And our panelists today are based in Slovenia, the USA and the UK. And on that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to our guest speakers for today. First, we have Ziva Thongvanh, Head of Projects at CEEMAN, which unites over 200 members from around 50 countries all over the world. And this includes universities, business schools, professional associations, companies and individuals. We also welcome Dr. Michael Goldman, who teaches on the University of San Francisco's Sport Management Master's Programme. Michael also holds an adjunct faculty role with the Gordon Institute of Business Science in Johannesburg and is the Editor-in-Chief of Emerald Publishing's Emerging Markets Case Studies collection. And finally, from Emerald Publishing, we have Gabi Rundle, our Cases Product Manager, who will talk to you a little bit about the competition and how to enter. I'm now going to hand over to Ziva, who will tell you about CEEMAN and the partnership with Emerald Publishing.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for the introduction, and a warm welcome to all of you joining us today for this webinar. So as you've heard, my name is Ziva Thongvanh, and I'm Head of Projects at CEEMAN. So maybe I could start with just a few sentences on what CEEMAN actually is and how are we connected to case writing. So CEEMAN was established 30 years ago as a management development association focusing mostly on Central and Eastern Europe. So this is also where the first 3 letters of our name come from. CEE of CEEMAN. It's for Central and Eastern Europe. We are located in Slovenia and our offices are in beautiful Bled, next to the Lake Bled that you can see on the picture on this first slide. So over the years, we grew, we developed, and we are now a global association with over 200 members from 50 countries. Really, mostly our members are universities and business schools, but also individuals and companies. And we also have exchange partnerships with other associations. So what do? We focus mostly on the faculty development. We organize educational programs for deans, for faculty, for staff. We organize international conferences and events, and we also hold regular free online webinars on different topics. We have our own accreditation, so we accredit business schools, and our accreditation is called CEEMAN Equa. I'm sure you probably already heard of it. We also do joint research projects, we do publications, and very importantly, we also do competitions and awards. So this brings us to our next slide. Sarah, I'll ask you. Okay, thank you so much. So this is the reason why we are all here today, and this is our case writing competition. This is actually one of our longest running activities, and we started it in 1996. And we're very happy to say that since 2007, we're running it together with Emerald Publishing as our partner. The aim of this competition is to promote the creation and the usage of local cases, focusing mostly on emerging markets. It is really important for every part of the world to have the local cases, so also very important for emerging markets. And it's important to have your own cases, really focusing on the local context. So here we want to make an impact, and that is why we have launched this competition years ago, and that's why we are still running it today. So the competition has monetary and non-monetary prizes. There are also publication opportunities with Emerald. So this is a great way to really make your work visible. And also something that I would like to point out is that if you submit your case early, you will get the chance for extra feedback from the judges. So we really highly recommend that. Submit your case early for this competition, and you will have the chance to make the necessary changes, polish up your case, and then submit again before the final deadline. So I know that Gabi will tell you all about the competition timeline and deadline, so I will not go there, but I will just move to my next slide. And I will tell you a bit more about the non-monetary prizes that are offered by CEEMAN. So the first thing I would like to mention is CEEMAN Annual Conference. We organize the conference every year, and each year it is in different country. But the upcoming one will be very special for us because we'll be celebrating 30 years of CEEMAN. So for this reason, we are bringing this event back home to Slovenia, and we will be having it from 21st to 23rd of September 2023 in Bled, Slovenia. So the winners of this competition, of case writing competition, will also be invited to join us at this conference to receive the award there in person. So that would be the first thing. And the second thing that is part of the award is scholarship for our flagship faculty development program called IMTA. IMTA is actually, it stands for International Management Teachers Academy. This program is amazing, I can tell you that. We get great feedbacks each year, and it has earned really one of the top spots among the best faculty development programs around the world. So, you know, it's really a special experience to have. We launched it in the year 2000, and since then we have educated over 650 educators from 50 countries around the world. IMTA focuses mostly on improving teaching skills, on improving the materials and methods. But what is also important is that it focuses on teaching with cases. We organize it annually, and usually it takes place in June, and the upcoming one will be taking place from 14th to 23rd June 2022 in Bled, Slovenia. So the winners of this competition will receive scholarships for this program. The first place gets a full scholarship, and second and third case receive partial scholarships. Okay, I think I'll stop here. I will move to my last slide where you can see my email written. So please feel free to contact me for any questions related to this competition, to the conference, to IMTA, or any other CEEMAN activity. So thank you so much for your attention, and I give the floor to Michael.
Well, thank you, Ziva. We are so pleased and proud to continue to partner with CEEMAN on this critical contribution to case research, to case writing around the world. Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Goldman, Associate Professor here at the University of San Francisco in California. But most importantly for today's conversation, I'm pleased to continue to be the Editor-in-Chief of Emerald Publishing's Emerging Market Case Studies collection. And what we thought might be useful today as you think about submitting your cases to this competition early for that judge's feedback is to spend a few moments talking about what we're seeing over the last few years with competition submissions, those that separate the good from the great, those that separate those that really get into the top 5, top 6 cases every year versus those that are good but really need a little bit more structuring, a little bit more development to shoot the lights out as a research output as well as a great product in the classroom for faculty to use around the world. So If we move through to the next few slides, I want to just share with you a little bit of what we're seeing around this area around discussion-based cases. Ziva mentioned the word impact. She spoke about really having an impact that CEEMAN's having through the competition and through their work over the last 30 years. And Emerald recognizes this idea of impact and talks about real impact. And one of the important aspects of real impact is that the publication of a case is just the first step. And the work we do in case research is so connected to industry, to organizations, to societies, that it has a real impact in the classroom with managers and with the organizations that we research and write cases about, that it can have a real impact. So as a scholar, as a faculty member, as a professor, wherever you are in an emerging market around the world, you may be facing some pressure to have an impact through your work. Part of that impact is obviously citations when you publish articles in peer-reviewed journals. But another part of that impact goes beyond citations. And we really think about real impact, the impact you can have through your work on an ongoing basis. And what we're obviously most excited about is the impact that case research can have. Quality discussion-based cases that are well researched with protagonists and primary and secondary data that are then used once they win competitions like CEEMAN's, that are used in classrooms around the world, that impact hundreds and thousands of students and are used by professors to really shape the way organizations work. That's the kind of impact that may excite you. It certainly excites many of us that do work in this case research space. So Emerald's been talking about that for quite some time. The AACSB has recognized that. And if we move on to the next slide, you'll see there's an organization that you may have looked at, the Responsible Research in Business and Management, a great collection of faculty that are looking closely at this issue. Here are the principles of their vision that they laid out a number of years ago. And you can see there the kind of impact they're talking about. And one of those, as you see there, is publication is just the first step, right? For many of us, when we publish peer-reviewed journal articles, it is the final step, right? We jump up and down and we're excited about it, and then we kind of move on to the next project. The great thing about case research is we do the same thing in peer-reviewed outlets such as EMCS, but then it's really about the work that happens afterwards with that case around the world. You can see the impact on collaboration and the importance of still doing good science. There have been a number of voices, as you can see on the next slide, a number of voices that have challenged us to think about the work we're doing. Here's Clayton Christensen commenting a few years ago about some of his early work. And what I hope you can see in this quotation is the impact of stepping back, looking beyond the data on the screen, looking beyond the data in the spreadsheet or the stats package, and thinking about exactly how organizations do what they do. And for Clayton Christensen, the acknowledgement here in this interview with him, that it was that work, sitting down and thinking about how that industry was operating, that really gave him some of the aha moments for his work. And I think for many of us, case research provides that opportunity. It provides an opportunity to step back and look at how organizations work, how managers make decisions, how different issues and factors play a role, which go beyond the numbers. And so case research often is a call for more qualitative work that leverages multiple data sources to understand a lot more of the dynamics of what's happening within a phenomenon, within an industry, within a country, within an organization, within a family business, within an entrepreneur building an organization. You can see the same comments in the next slide from Greg Fisher at Indiana, who's also the editor of Business Horizons. And his editorial that you may have seen in the last few months, calling for much more practitioner-focused work, right? That has higher relevance to stakeholders and reinforces the impact on teaching. So we're seeing a theme here in what many of our colleagues are writing about in their work and in their publications. The next one as well, from the Journal of Marketing. Here's the American Marketing Association, this next slide. There we go. Thanks, Sarah. And this editorial I found really interesting earlier this year. John, Carl, and Christine talking about in the marketing context, how do we continue to strengthen the connection between thinking and doing, right? Between academia and practice, and a strong focus there, as you can see in that editorial that you may have seen in the Journal of Marketing, around case research and writing cases, right? Teaching cases, discussion-based cases that are well researched but are used in the classroom to do so much more, to connect so much more. And then lastly, some comments here from Michael Porter on the next slide. He gave a speech at a NACRA conference, the North American Case Research Association, some years ago, and again reflecting on his own career and the work he did to understand industry competitiveness. And here in this quotation, you can see again a acknowledgement of this, the importance of using different kind of research approaches, including more longitudinal, more in-depth, more case-based work. And if you've been in a classroom with Michael Porter teaching you one of his cases, or you've had the opportunity to teach one of his cases about the Chilean wine industry, or about the development of Singapore, or any of these really interesting in-depth cases where the voice of the protagonist comes alive in making those decisions. It really gives you a sense of how the theory and the models come to life in practice when protagonists, when managers, when officials have to make those decisions. So I hope that gives you a sense with some of these external words, these perspectives around the context that excites us the most for this competition and for our work in case writing. What you'll see in the next slide is how we think about case research. And of course, when we're talking about case research, there are at least two potential outputs. The work we do when we triangulate different sources and we look closely at one or more organization and we do a number of interviews and documentary analysis, we've got this case study database, right? We've got all of this information that we've gathered through good scientific research. Now, what do we do with it? And there certainly are two main ways that we can write this up. On the left-hand side of the slide, you'll see a typical article case. And these are peer-reviewed journal articles that are written with case methodology. And they have everything together in that article. And it goes through a typical process and it's published in a typical journal. And many of us have done that kind of work, and that's important for one part of our scholarly lives. Our focus today for this competition and for EMCS is the work on the right, which is different. And that's a discussion-based case or a teaching case. And this is different because although the data may be similar, right? It's perhaps similar interviews, a similar kind of approach that you took as a scholar, as a researcher, as a writer. The work you do in putting the case and the teaching note or instructor manual together is quite different. The style of writing is quite different. The intended audience is quite different. And so it's a different genre. It's a different style. And so in that sense, we need to be very clear about what the focus is. The focus for our conversation today, the focus for the competition, the focus for EMCS cases are those on the right-hand side of the slide, discussion-based cases, those that are focused on a decision. They certainly describe a situation, but you are placed in the decision-making of the protagonist, and you have the information that the protagonist has at that time, and you need to make a decision. The answer is not in the case. The analysis is not in the case. The interpretation, the conclusion is not in the case. The application of theory or the creation or refinement of theory is not in the case. That's all in the teaching note. And so quite a different way of writing and a different way of using the data, the case research data, to create a scholarly output. Still peer-reviewed, still published in respected prestigious journals and collections, but a very different kind of output. And that's important to recognize as we kind of head into this. What I want to do in the next few minutes, if I may, through the next few slides, is give you an example of that style, of that genre. And so on this next slide, you can see an example here of a typical article on the left-hand side that many of us have published and continue to do, a typical article with multiple different approaches to methodology. You can see the kind of writing, more scholarly writing. Our audience here is the academy. Our audience here are other researchers, our colleagues, a few students, but typically senior students or doctoral students. That's our focus on the left. On the right is a discussion-based case study. This is the example case study that we have available for anyone to look at on the EMCS website. We have the case and the teaching note freely available for you to look and think about from a construction point of view. And here you can see, this is one that I did some years ago, you can see how the style of writing is different. The structure is different. I'm just giving you the two front pages here. It puts you in a situation at a point in time, right? And there is Suzanne Stevens, the protagonist in that case, and she's in Johannesburg, and she's reflecting on what they've done over the last few years. And she's wondering about the choices that they need to make going forward. And then the case lays out a little bit of that background and a lot more about the choices, the options, the implications of those choices without the answers, so that students at the end of that case, right, and professors and instructors and teachers in the classroom can lead the conversation to the point of, okay, you are Suzanne Stevens. Now, what do you do and why? And the idea is there shouldn't be one answer, right? This is not a comprehension test where you need to pick A, B, or C, and A is definitely the right answer. The idea of management, the idea of decision making, is that we often don't know what's going to happen before it happens. But the quality of our decision making is based on the extent to which we consider all the options fully, the extent to which we have done good analysis that surfaces the risks and the opportunities, that allows us to fully debate in an executive classroom kind of situation, whatever level of study we might be at, an executive decision-making managerial classroom situation. We're able to debate, hear different perspectives in the room, and walk away with a stronger approach to making better quality decisions by applying the relevant models and frameworks that research tell us is often more successful in those situations. That's the magic in the classroom. That's the magic of a great case narrative that sets up that learning opportunity for the student. On the next slide, I want to highlight a couple of aspects around each one of these pieces of the discussion-based case. As I mentioned before, there are two documents, right? On the left-hand side, there's the case study document, referred to as the case study narrative or the case study. This is about 8 pages long. Before you have some exhibits or appendices at the end. It's written in a little bit more of a journalistic style, more accessible, a business kind of writing, as opposed to an academic, scholarly kind of style. It's signed off by the organization, especially if you have primary data. So if you conduct interviews with the protagonist, with the organization, and you gather primary data from them in those interviews or in documents or in observations, it needs to be signed off. You need to have that permission. You can, of course, do secondary source cases. These are those where you do not talk to the company at all, or if you talk to them, nothing you get from them you can use in the case, right? They don't have to give permission, and they may not give permission for that case. But if everything in the case is from secondary sources, public information, industry reports, other research that's been done, congressional hearings here in the US, other legislative processes or hearings or judgments, anything that is in the public domain, that is accessible publicly, and that is used as a secondary source, you don't need the company to sign off. You may want the company to sign off, you may want the organization's support, but we don't always get that for whatever reason. That case can still be published, that case can still be submitted. And many of the best cases we've seen in the last few years about interesting emerging market entrepreneurs and family businesses and organizations have been based off secondary sources only. The method section, which is in the teaching note, will clearly lay that out. The case will be well researched with lots of references from those secondary sources. We have to be careful in a secondary source case about ascribing any words or actions or beliefs to any of the characters in the case if we don't have evidence for that. So in a secondary source case, be very careful about editorializing. Be very careful about putting words or actions in the mouth or feet of those characters. Everything must be well researched, and you must have a source, have some evidence for what you're putting in the case. But those can be exceptionally powerful in the classroom as well. So that's the case study on the left. On the right-hand side, you can see the teaching note. This is really the document that unlocks the case. It allows the instructor to really think about how they would teach this case. So a big part of the teaching note is the teaching plan. How am I going to teach it? What are the components or pastures? Some case researchers, some case teachers refer to pastures or sections or components of the teaching plan. What am I going to teach? And then what am I going to teach? And then what am I going to teach? Not just, the topic and the time, but how am I going to transition between those pastures or sections? What are the kinds of questions or prompts or exercises or learning activities that I can weave into a very effective and engaging teaching learning environment? We facilitate case learning. We don't teach a case, right? The words we use sometimes describe accurately our approach to education. And we want to be careful about thinking about this is the case and I'm going to teach it to you. I'm going to tell you what's in the case. Remember that participant-centered case-based learning is where we facilitate learning by facilitating a conversation, a debate, a rigorous debate about the information in the case, where the majority of the talking should be the students in the room. That's what a good teaching plan does. And many of the award-winning cases that we see submitted to the CEEMAN competition every year have excellent teaching notes, where the instructors have really thought about how this case would be taught well. Many of the cases that are submitted for the competition have been taught before. They've been tested. I've done this many times, and perhaps so have you. We write a case, we develop it, and then we test it a few times in the class. And we might have 3 or 4 versions before we get to one that we want to submit to a competition or to a publication. Testing your case in the classroom is an excellent way of seeing how your perception of how students will respond compares to how they actually respond. So that's a really good way of strengthening your teaching plan. The other component quickly in the teaching note is the model answers to the assignment questions. Remember thinking about some good pedagogics or andragogics, adult learning or college university learning. We want to have some learning outcomes that describe what the student will be able to do by the end of this case, right? So some good learning outcomes that are aligned with a typical syllabus or a typical curriculum in a typical course, right? Because that's obviously where we want our cases to be used. Those learning outcomes are then flow into some assignment or discussion questions, right? Typically 4, 5, 6 assignment questions that allow a deeper dive into the case. These may be set for pre-work by the students, or these questions could be the core of the discussion in the room, or they could be used for assignments or exams after the case discussion. So you can structure those questions in a number of ways. The most important aspect is that your model answers for those questions need to fully integrate the relevant literature and frameworks that we want to surface in the case. So we go back to Michael Porter and you think about his Chilean wine cluster example for a moment, the diamond framework or some of his industry analysis, those frameworks would come alive in the model answers to the assignment questions. So how should a new entrant in the Chilean wine cluster industry think about the power of rivalry, or think about how they position themselves within that industry, right? Where in the supply chain or where in the value chain do they position themselves? That might be a question in that case. A good model answer would be perhaps a page or so of a deep analysis. And this is where we put our analysis and scholarly hat on, and we develop quality answers for that question based on the information in the case and based on application of good theory, frameworks, and models. Be careful of including information in the teaching note that is not in the case. If students do not have that information from the case, then they can't use it in their analysis and in their proposed solutions, and so it shouldn't be in the teaching note. And so that's a bit of a red flag you want to be careful of. And we have had a few submissions where the authors, the case writers, include information that really should be in the case or should not be used in the model answers in the teaching note. Again, 8, 10, 12 pages of a teaching note, and this is where a lot of our focus needs to be as we develop this case research product. Let me jump on to a few more slides here as we start wrapping up this quick dive into some quality cases. Here you can see it's a, how do we think about finding these great case stories? Think about the stories on the right-hand side that grab your attention. The stories that would be interesting to students. What's happening in your marketplace? What's happening in a nearby marketplace? What kind of consulting work or what are alumni doing that give you access to business, organizational, decision-making stories that deserve to be told, that would engage people around the world. That's one way to think about finding interesting cases. The other part of that, obviously, is think about your syllabus. And think about my syllabus and think about other people's syllabi. Where would they teach this? Where might there be gaps? We know there's some great cases to teach branding, but what about segmentation? We know there's some really good cases to teach competitive strategy, but what about emerging strategy? So from a syllabus or a course outline or a content point of view, that's where you might find some gaps as well. So think about as you're diving into this, especially if you're early on in the process. On the next slide, a couple of quick comments about the data and the gathering. As I mentioned, you're going to have a research methods section in the teaching note. There's an example of a quick research methods section that I wrote for a recent case study on Britta and Steph Curry. The notes on the right-hand side give you a sense of the kind of secondary sources that you might be using in a case. And depending on what access your library, your information center has, you'll see there's a lot of databases out there that'll give you access, not just to journal academic articles, but importantly, for a case, to business industry sources. Right? If I'm writing, for example, that case about Britta, which is that water filter, right? The jug and the water filters, I needed to really understand the water filtration business and industry globally, right? That's not my expertise, right? I teach marketing. In fact, I teach sport marketing. So what do I know about Britta and about water filtration? So I dove into some of those databases and got access to these industry reports and was able to write into the case a clearer understanding of that industry so that anyone could pick up the case and within a few minutes understand enough about that industry and the competitors and the dynamics in order to help the protagonist at Britta make a better decision. And that's our job when we do the case research, right? Is to familiarize ourselves through these secondary sources, which is also a great way to make sure that the data we're using is sound and is coming from multiple sources. So we can write up those sections. All right, as I start closing here, let me end with some quick summary comments on the next slide. Some of these points I've mentioned already, but let me kind of close with these ideas. Remember the opening section of the case, like the first 5 minutes of your favorite movie or film. That's what grabs you. I tell my students that when they write the opening paragraph, the introduction for a paper, that should be the last thing they write, because it's one of the most important things, because it's the first thing that other people read. Similarly, when you write a case, you may have multiple drafts and you may want to start your writing with the opening section, but please do multiple drafts and end your case writing again with the opening section. It's such a critical part of the quality of a case. You want to introduce the protagonist. You want to make us interested in that protagonist. Very importantly, the dilemma, the decision. What's the urgency? What's the seriousness? Why does this decision matter? How might it be a bet the business kind of decision? Or how might it have some personal career implications for that character? How is that dilemma or decision important, serious, and urgent? Why does the decision need to be taken now? Some of the best cases we saw submitted last year had a very clear timeline, right? It was June 25th, and on August 6th, the protagonist had to go in front of the board of directors and present a financial restructuring plan. And if that plan did not pass, the board would have made some kind of negative decision. And that executive knew that although they'd been doing this for 15 years, this was one of the most important presentations they were ever going to make, because so much rode on that decision, right? So think about how we set up the dilemma, set up the decision. The date and location need to come through early as well. So in the first few sentences in that opening section, think about the protagonist or the characters. Make sure the dilemma or the decision comes right up front, right? It is, what is it today? November 30th. It is Tuesday, November 30th, and the protagonist was thinking this or was facing that, right? Take us right to the action. You can then go back and tell some of the story, right, on page 2 and page 3, but take us right to the action point, the decision point from the first few sentences. The narrative, those next few pages, right, remember it's always in the past tense. If the case is November 30th, then everything else comes before that. We talk about everything in the case in the past tense, right? Slovenia was the most beautiful country on the planet. India was the largest free market democracy in the world. Whatever it is, right? Not is, but was. Past tense. Because think about someone picking up your case in 5 or 6 years' time, right? We don't know what the world's going to be like, right? We don't know what the world's going to be like next week. So everything needs to be in the past tense. Endnotes and sourcing, right? Make sure that you've got good secondary sources, even if your case has primary data. So even if there are interviews and documents that you've looked at from the organization, back that up and support that with good secondary sources as well, right? Think about good case research has multiple sources, what they call triangulation, right? If you think about a method point of view. Storytelling flow, think about storytelling, right? Storytelling is about keeping the reader engaged, having this dilemma thread, right? This thread of the decision throughout the case. Lastly, some comments here about language. It's the objective third person writing style, right? So you are telling the story, right? Someone is watching this movie, they're reading about the situation. Write for an international audience, right? You may think that the issues in your country are unique, and to some extent they may be nuanced, but they're probably not unique. And there probably are international comparisons, or at least international examples of a similar kinds of issue. Write so that anyone in the world can pick up your case and use it without having to deep dive into a glossary or deep dive into what on earth is that issue in that country. So we have to describe things that might be a little bit more nuanced. We have to describe it in a way so that anyone in the world can understand it. And then English editing is critical, right? We know that English may not be the first language of many of the case authors that do great work around the world, especially in emerging markets. But what we also know is for international adoption and acknowledgement and recognition of great case research, it needs to be well understood, right? And so our cases need to be well written. And we need to make sure that the writing and the editing and the language and the sentence structures really come off the page beautifully. So work with colleagues. If this is a challenge for you, make sure you tap into some language editing resources to make sure that your case not just meets the standards, but is beautifully written so that students anywhere in the world can pick it up and find it a joy to read. Yes, there's going to be numbers and information and things they need to analyze and work through. Yes, case analysis is sometimes a tough nut to crack for the students. But let's not make the language part of the tough nut for them to crack. Let's make sure that we're writing in a very accessible, easy to understand, and correct way of writing. So Sarah, I hope that's useful. Let me kind of hand over here to Gabi, I think, for the next few slides on the competition and on Emerald. And I hope this deep dive into some of the issues we've seen over the last few years are useful to you as you prepare your case and get ready to submit it early for some judges' feedback. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you, Ziva, for your presentations. So I'm the cases product manager here at Emerald. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the emerging markets case studies collection as a publication and how you can submit to the competition and what resources we have for authors considering submitting. So if you just move on to that first slide, all cases submitted to the Emerald CEEMAN case competition will be submitted to the Emerald's Emerging Markets Case Studies collection. The link to submit is on the next slide. I will talk through that in just a second. But so because submissions go to the EMCS collection, as we call it, it needs to meet the aims and scopes of that collection. EMCS publishes a number of it's a rapidly growing collection. Sorry, we publish 140 to 150 cases a year, including authentic examples of organisational challenges within emerging markets. I think Ziva commented on this on her slides. It really is kind of a global publication outlet. We don't really have kind of limits on where cases need to be based. They need to come from kind of developing economies, but we want to be kind of as inclusive as possible. And the importance of supplying faculty around the world with cases relevant to their region is something we're really passionate about. So it really is kind of a global publication outlet. In terms of kind of business and management disciplines, we're really kind of open again into any kind of business management discipline is welcome. Again, on the next slide, there is sorry if we keep it on this one, but in a second there will be a link to the aims and scopes of the emerging markets case studies collection. I would suggest you read those before you submit. We also welcome submissions at any point to EMCS. So if you're thinking that you're interested in writing a case but you don't think this year's or the 2022 competition is going to work out for you, we are open to submissions at any point. And we're also open to people joining as reviewers for the collection. So my email address is there, grundle@emerald.com, and also my colleague James Hobbs, who is the cases lead. If you have any interest in becoming a reviewer, submitting a case study kind of outside of this competition, or want to be involved in the collection in any other way, please do reach out to me, James, and we would love to hear from you. There is a link there to the collection as well, and there is a virtual issue of winning cases. I think there was a question in the chat which was where can you go to read the previous winning cases, or where are they published? So they are all, the winning cases are published in the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection. We also publish a number of cases that are submitted to the competition but aren't necessarily those top 3, so they will all go on to be considered for publication, and you can read them at that link there. If you can just go on to the next slide, please. Oh, sorry. So I've got the deadlines there. So the early submission deadline, which again Ziva mentioned briefly, is the 28th of February, and the final submission deadline is the 17th of April. Now, what this means is that the lead judge is willing to read cases submitted to the competition before the 28th of February, and will read the case and the teaching note and give what we call early submission feedback to the authors. I think there's a period of about 2 weeks that he has those cases and can look at them and will give you feedback in time for you to revise and resubmit your case in time for that final submission deadline of the 17th of April. And we have had feedback from authors previously saying just how useful this feedback is. It's not kind of a formal peer review, which your case will go into kind of after the competition. It's the judge giving feedback on how you can use the few weeks before the deadline to improve your case and your teaching note. So I would very much encourage you to submit for the 28th of February if you can, and if you're then able to put aside some time and revise and resubmit for that final deadline. I would just say that we do require submissions to be full submissions at that point, the case study and the teaching note, in order for that feedback to be given. You know, we have time, you have time to kind of revise and resubmit it, but it does need to be kind of a complete submission by that point. So as I said before, the cases need to meet the EMCS aims and scopes, and the link to that and the author guidelines is there. All cases should be based on a real situation in a real company. As Michael said, he talked about the difference of primary and secondary research cases, and we are open to both, but they do need to be based in a real situation. So we do not accept fictionalized cases at all. And all necessary permissions need to be cleared prior to submission. So this includes if you've done primary research, getting case study consent. There is a form to our Emerald's case study consent form under the author guidelines there. And you also require permission for any images or screenshots that are not available in the public domain. And I also want to draw your attention there to the Cases Hub. The Cases Hub, if you found this session useful, which I hope you have, hearing Michael talk about how to develop your case and teaching note, the Cases Hub is a free online resource that we've developed to help our cases authors through every step of the case writing process. So it includes interactive videos, interactive guides, videos. Michael Goldman has been was very involved in developing this resource, so there's a lot more from him on there, all the way through to selecting your topic, undertaking your first bit of kind of case research, through to submission, test teaching your case, which he mentioned as well, and then there's feedback on there on how to revise and resubmit your case after receiving reviewer feedback. So it really is a very comprehensive resource. There are modules on there as well on how to teach using case studies, and most recently we added some modules on there aimed for students, so how to learn with a case study. So if you're interested in kind of giving your students who are maybe newer to case study lessons some extra resources, they're on there as well. So I would really encourage you to have a look at that, even if you're a more experienced case writer, but there might be a certain aspect of case writing that you want to kind of a bit of a freshener on, you can just go on there and select the modules that you think will be relevant to you. And then finally, Ziva also talked about the CEEMAN prizes in the courses. The total prize fund for the top 3 cases is €4,000. That's split between the top 3. I believe the top prize is €2,500. So the prize fund really is, you know, quite sizable. And as Ziva mentioned, it's the financial prize is only part of it, and there's so much more to win as well. I think that's kind of everything from me. That was very swift. I would very much encourage you, yeah, there's my email, so please do get in touch if you have any questions or queries on how to submit. The author guidelines and the Cases Hub, I would really encourage you to have a look at if you are thinking of submitting. Michael mentioned the Bright Rock case that he has written and published in the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection. That case and teaching note are on there. So if you kind of want a sample of what we see as a very good quality case that's published in EMCS, that's really useful. There's also on there a teaching note template that Michael Goldman has also put together, and it's quite a useful way to kind of work through approaching writing a teaching note and ensuring that you've got everything covered that you need there. And these slides will be emailed to you along with the recording after the webinar, so please do look at those links, and the links to submit were on there as well. So I'll pass back to Sarah and see if we've got any questions from anyone. If we don't, please do write your questions in the questions box here.
Excellent, thank you, Gabi, and thank you to our speakers. So as Gabi said, we can now start on the questions. Feel free to type in the chat box on the right hand side of your screen, and we do have a couple of questions that have come in throughout the session, so I'll just read them out. Gabi, I think you covered the one about where you can read the winning and top cases. That was the one you covered, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yep. So somebody has asked, what is the acceptance ratio of EMCS?
So I would, apologies, I would have to get kind of up-to-date numbers for you. What I would say is, unlike, I guess maybe kind of more traditional outputs, we don't have kind of a really high rejection rate that we're really pleased with, and we want to be really kind of exclusive. That's not at all kind of what the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection tries to do. What I would say is, if you're considering submitting to this competition or to EMCS generally, is the majority of cases submitted that do go on to be accepted require a relatively large number of revisions, and what the EMCS team really try and do is, if a case has been submitted and the editorial team feels that it has the potential to go on to be published, even if it's kind of really not there yet, they will work really closely with the authors, giving kind of as much feedback as possible, really kind of guiding them through the revise and resubmit process along with our reviewing team, to make sure once that case goes on to be accepted, it's the best possible version of that case as possible. That might be after kind of 4 or 5 rounds of review. So I do kind of want to caveat that, but we do kind of try wherever possible to engage the authors who have submitted with us to go on to be accepted, rather than kind of have a really high rejection rate that we're kind of, gatekeeping almost. So I apologise, I can have a look at that and get back to the author individually if they kind of want specific numbers on that.
Yep, that's fine. We've got a note of your details, so we can find that out and send that on afterwards. The next question is just about becoming a reviewer. Someone's asking how you can become a reviewer for teaching cases at Emerald.
Yeah, so again, if we've got your details, which I think they are in the chat there, I'll get in touch with you afterwards and send you some more information on that. So if anyone else is interested in that as well, please do kind of drop a note in the comments there. As I said, we're always open to bringing more reviewers on board. What I would do is ask you to set up an account on the system, and in your areas of expertise. So these are the subject areas that you're willing to review cases on. Obviously no one kind of has the entire, business management portfolio covered. So you kind of update your areas of expertise with the subject areas that you're willing to review cases on. One of the editorial team members, once they've got a case that's ready for review and is aligned to those subject areas, would go out and invite you for review. There are set questions that we ask our reviewers to complete when reading a case and a teaching note, and then after that the reviewers, you're given a score, so that's in terms of the quality of the review, the speed of the review, so we kind of try and ensure the more reviews you complete and the higher quality they are, you'll kind of be invited to review more within reason. Of course, I think we try and ask people if they would be willing to complete kind of 2 or 3 reviews a year. That's great. So if you're interested in that, please do pop your name in the chat. That would be great.
Lovely, thank you. So we've got another question here. Someone's asked, is it better to focus on an organisation or entire industry in writing an in-depth teaching case?
So Michael, if you're still around, thank you.
Yeah, what a great question. And although I used the Michael Porter example, I think it's fair to say that most quality cases are written around one organization. They focus on a protagonist or a set of decision makers, an executive team, for example, within one organization. That organization obviously exists within an industry or within a cluster, but quality cases, especially award-winning cases, typically are focused on one organization. It really is a deep dive into the decision making around sustainability or around competitiveness or around excuse me, operations of that specific organization. So I would pick one as the focus of your case, and then I would pick at least one protagonist. Typically there is an executive and someone else within the organization. Different views within the organization is really powerful as well as a learning point. You want students to identify with the protagonist, with the characters, and with the organization so that they can see themselves as decision makers in that organization.
That's great. Just one final one. So if I don't win, will my case still be published?
So if you don't win, your case will still be considered for publication. So all of the cases, when they're submitted, go to the judges. They then pick the top 3 cases. All of the cases then go for peer review. So that's including the winning cases and the not winning cases. Again, as I said, for EMCS, we do tend to see for the majority of cases submitted, a revision decision is made. So the authors, the reviewers and judges will go back with feedback, asking for the cases to be revised and resubmitted. It may well be that, you know, when we see submissions, that there is a variety of decisions made on them. It might be that the winning case goes on to be accepted straight away. I can't guarantee that. It might be that other cases go on to be accepted straight away. I would say that's unlikely, because, you know, if we have the top 3 cases already, perfect. I mean, that would be a very successful competition. That would be great. But I would say normally even the winning cases require kind of minor edits. So if the case doesn't win, the cases you will be sent feedback regardless, and a revision decision or potentially a reject decision will be made, but that will be based on the case itself, rather than we're not kind of mass rejecting the cases that didn't win by any means. They all go for peer review, and they will all be comments will all be sent back to the authors with a decision as to its publication in the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection.
Great, thank you, Gabi. That's the last of our questions, and I think we're just about at time as well, so we'll just wrap up there. So thank you to everyone who's attended today's webinar for your time, and also to our speakers. Thank you very much. And as mentioned, you'll receive an email within the next day with a recording of today's webinar. And please don't hesitate to get in touch with us if you have any follow-up questions, using the details shared with you in the email and on the slide there just now as well. So thank you very much, and goodbye.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.